Hey guys, Ms. Whitaker here. I am ready to start our close reading lesson with you guys for today. Today is Wednesday, March 25th, and we are going to get started with your packet that says Close Reading and Read Aloud Week 3. So we are actually going to be flipping over today, and we're going to be reading this text right here, which is called Introduction to the Holocaust. So if you want to go ahead and flip over to that page with me, we'll get started. Before we jump into our text, I just kind of wanted to give us some background information and some knowledge about why we're reading this text and why we're studying this time in history, because it's actually a really sad and really hard time in history to learn about and read about, but it's really important that we do. And so today we're going to begin our study on this time period called the Holocaust. And it's a really dark period in our world's history. And during our unit, we're going to be studying just World War II more in depth, as well as just some of these atrocities and evil things that were committed by the Nazi regime during the Holocaust. And so it's going to help us to understand our novel a little better, because our text Number the Stars is actually set during a time in Denmark when the Nazi soldiers were in that area taking over the country. And so we're going to start our study today with an explanation of what the Holocaust was, and then we are going to use that information to unlock some knowledge in our novel today. There are going to be some really difficult things that we do discuss during our study. So I really encourage you guys to talk to your parents kind of about the things that we're learning, or you can always email your teachers or talk to them on your Zoom chats. But this is going to be a topic that isn't necessarily fun to learn about in ways. And so I really just encourage you guys to really chat with your parents, talk about it more if you have questions, if you're wondering, but it is a really important time in history for us to learn about. And so we're really just going to focus today kind of about what the Holocaust was and how that's going to help us connect to Number the Stars. So we know that these are going to be some difficult things that we talk about, but it is really important for us to educate ourselves on history, even when it's not good stuff, because we want to make sure that nothing like this ever happens again. And so when we're reading today, I want you to realize just how much damage that hate and prejudice towards people can do. And so that's going to be a real lesson that we can take away from this reading that we're doing. So today we have a nonfiction text in front of us, and I'm actually going to go quickly to, before we start, I have some vocabulary words and our thinking job up for us. So our vocabulary words today that we're going to need to be on the lookout for are the words persecution, inferior, superior, occupy, and exploit. So as we, whoops, my bad, sorry guys. As we get to those words in our text, I'm going to circle them just like we do in class, and we'll define them as we go. But you're going to need those words to help you kind of unlock the meaning of our work. Also, while we're reading today, I went ahead and wrote our thinking job on this slide here. So while we're reading, we're going to focus on what is the author teaching us about the Holocaust and how we can connect that information to our novel, Number the Stars. Okay? I'll let you guys read that for just a second. I'm going to go back to my document camera here, and I'm going to go ahead and write my thinking job. Whoops. There we go. I'm going to write my thinking job at the top of my text. Now, we know that this is a nonfiction text because this actually happened in history. So we're going to use our nonfiction thinking jobs like I just showed you to help guide our reading today. So NF for nonfiction. And we know that when we are reading nonfiction, we always need to identify the topic, and we always need to focus on what the author is teaching us about that topic. We know that our topic today is just going to be right here, the Holocaust. And we don't know yet what the author is teaching us, so we're going to leave this blank, but I am going to go ahead and write myself a key question. And that key question is going to guide my thinking and goes back to that thinking job that I showed you guys a minute ago. But my key question is just going to be, what is the author, and I'm just going to put TM for teach me, teaching me about the Holocaust. And so every time we come to the end of a section, we're going to pause and we're going to go back to this key question, and we're going to be asking ourselves, what is the author teaching us about the Holocaust in each section? Okay. So we're ready to jump in. Remember that we're going to pause when we see certain vocabulary words. We're also going to pause to do our annotations and ask ourselves to do some thinking. Here we go. During World War II, the German government, run by Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party, systematically killed around 6 million people just because of their race or other aspects of their identity. As you read, take notes on the different groups that were targeted by the Nazis during the Holocaust. The Holocaust was the systematic, bureaucratic, state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million Jews by Adolf Hitler and his Nazi regime. Pause for just a second. We see the word persecution right here, and this word actually has a footnote underneath it. So I'm going to go down to the bottom of my text here and read what the word persecution means. We see it again down here. Persecution is a noun, and it means harassment, oppression, or mistreatment, especially because of race or religion. Okay, so I'm not going to write my definition down here because it has a footnote. I'm not going to write my definition up here because it has a footnote down there. Holocaust is a word of Greek origin meaning sacrifice by fire. The Nazis who came to power in Germany in January of 1933 believed that Germans were racially superior and that Jews deemed inferior were an alien threat to the so-called German racial community. We're going to pause here for a second because, again, I see two vocabulary words that we talked about. When someone is saying that they are superior, they are saying that they are better than somebody else. So the Germans believed that they were better than the Jewish people, even though it was not true. So superior just means better than. And inferior, if superior means better than, inferior means less than. So they believed that they were better than and that the Jews were less than them. Let's keep reading. During the era of the Holocaust, German authorities also targeted other groups because of their perceived racial inferiority. Roma, Gypsies, the disabled, and some Slavic peoples, Poles, Russians, and others. Other groups were persecuted on political, ideological, and behavioral grounds, among them communists, socialists, Jehovah's Witnesses, and homosexuals. We're going to pause right here for just a second. And I want us to go back to our key question, which was, what is the author teaching me about the Holocaust? Okay. And right here, as I'm reading, I'm realizing that the Nazis believed themselves. Oops, sorry, my handwriting is sloppy today. The Nazis believed themselves better than other groups of people and mistreated those groups. Okay. So when I'm thinking about what the author is teaching me about the Holocaust in this section, the author's teaching me that the Nazis believed themselves better than other groups of people and mistreated those groups. I'm going to keep going to our next section. In 1933, the Jewish population of Europe stood at over 9 million. Most European Jews lived in countries that Nazi Germany would occupy or influence during World War II. Stop right there because I see another one of our vocabulary words. To occupy a space like a country during war just means to invade and take over. To invade and take over. So if we talk about how the Nazis are occupying Denmark in our book Number the Stars, it just means they've taken over the country and they've invaded it. Okay. By 1945, the Germans and their collaborators killed nearly 2 out of every 3 European Jews as a part of the final solution, the Nazi policy to murder the Jews of Europe. Although Jews whom the Nazis deemed a priority danger to Germany were the primary victims of Nazi racism, other victims included some 200,000 Roma gypsies, at least 200,000 mentally or physically disabled patients, mainly Germans, living in institutional settings, were murdered in the so-called euthanasia program. We're going to keep going. This section continues on the next page. As Nazi tyranny spread across Europe, the Germans and their collaborators persecuted and murdered millions of other people. Between 2 and 3 million Soviet prisoners of war were murdered or died of starvation, disease, neglect, or maltreatment. The Germans targeted non-Jewish Polish intelligentsia for killing and deported millions of Polish and Soviet civilians for forced labor in Germany or in occupied Poland, where these individuals worked and often died in deplorable conditions. From the earliest years of the Nazi regime, German authorities persecuted homosexuals and others whose behavior did not match prescribed social norms. German police officials targeted thousands of political opponents, including communists, socialists, and trade unionists, and religious dissidents such as Jehovah's Witnesses. Many of these individuals died as a result of incarceration and maltreatment. So what I'm doing right now is I'm going back here to the beginning and looking back at my key question: what is the author teaching me about the Holocaust? And I want to look at this section we just read. And in my section, as I go back, I know that we're talking about how the Nazis killed and mistreated millions of different people here in the text. And so going back to my question, I'm going to go ahead and make an annotation for this one right here, but I'm going to give you guys just a second to make your own annotation before I make mine, because I want you guys to do some of the thinking work. While you guys are finishing yours, I'm going to go ahead and write mine down. Okay. Here's the annotation I came up with. The Nazis killed and mistreated any group of people they believed as inferior. Remember, we said that inferior means that you believe something is less than something else. Okay, let's go ahead and look at our final section. Actually, we have 2 more sections. Administration of the final solution. In the early years of the Nazi regime, the National Socialist government established concentration camps to detain real and imagined political and ideological opponents. Increasingly in the years before the outbreak of war, SS and police officials incarcerated Jews, Roma, and other victims of ethnic and racial hatred in these camps. To concentrate and monitor the Jews' population as well as to facilitate later deportation of the Jews, the Germans and their collaborators created ghettos, transit camps, and forced labor camps in order to keep Jews grouped closely together during the war years. The German authorities, I apologize, that's my dog barking. Give me 1 second. To keep the Jews grouped closely together during the war years. The German authorities also established numerous forced labor camps, both in the so-called Greater German Reich and in the German-occupied territory, for non-Jews whose labor the Germans sought to exploit. Again, right here, we see another vocabulary word. If you are exploiting something, it just means you are benefiting from it and making use of it, usually to the expense of somebody else. For example, the Nazis were exploiting these people working in the camps because they were not paying them, but they were benefiting from the work that they did. They were treating them poorly, but they were gaining from them, so they were exploiting. Following the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing units, and later militarized battalions of order police officials moved behind German lines to carry out mass murder operations against Jews, Roma, and the Soviet state and Communist Party officials. German SS and police units, supported by units of the Wehrmacht and the Waffen-SS, murdered more than 1 million Jewish men, women, and children, and hundreds of thousands of others. Between 1941 and 1944, Nazi German authorities deported millions of Jews from Germany, from occupied territories, and from the countries of many of its Axis allies to ghettos and killing centers, often called extermination camps, where they were murdered in specially developed gassing facilities. Right here, I'm going back to my key question and asking myself, what is the author teaching me about the Holocaust right here? As I'm reading this, I'm noticing that there are some really terrible things that were being done against the Jewish people. And as we read them here, it almost doesn't seem real that something like this could happen, but this was actually happening the entire time during World War II and before. And so when we're thinking about kind of how this connects to our novel, realizing the dangers that the people in our novel would have been in during this time, these are great dangers that we're seeing here because of the evil that was being committed by the Nazi regime. So going back to my key question, what is the author teaching you about the Holocaust? I'm going to let you make your annotation really quick. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to jot some things down, and then I'm going to go ahead and start writing mine. Okay, so I have my annotation written down. The Nazis created concentration and work camps and murdered millions of Jewish people there. I'll give you a second to look at my annotation and copy down mine or edit your own work. Okay, we're gonna flip to the very last page of our text today. And this section is called the end of the Holocaust. So we're gonna see how the Holocaust finally came to a close and what happened as a result of it. In the final months of the war, SS guards moved camp inmates by train or on forced marches, often called death marches, in an attempt to prevent the Allied liberation of large numbers of prisoners. As Allied forces moved across Europe in a series of offensives against Germany, they began to encounter and liberate concentration camp prisoners, as well as prisoners en route by forced march from one camp to another. The marches continued until May 7, 1945, the day the German armed forces surrendered unconditionally to the Allies. For the Western Allies, World War II was officially ended in Europe on the next day, May 8th, while Soviet forces announced their victory day on May 9th, 1945. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, many survivors found shelter in displaced persons camps administered by the Allied powers. Between 1948 and 1951, almost 700,000 Jews immigrated to Israel, including 136,000 Jewish displaced persons from Europe. Other Jewish DPs immigrated to the United States and other nations. The last DP camp closed in 1957. The crimes committed during the Holocaust devastated most European Jewish communities and eliminated hundreds of Jewish communities in occupied Eastern Europe entirely. So right here, as I'm finishing up, I'm just going to go ahead and write my annotation for this one. When we see the word devastated right here, it just means to totally destroy. So because of the crimes that were committed, the terrible things that were done to the Jewish people, it destroyed most of the European Jewish communities because it killed so many of the people there. So for my annotation for this one, I wrote down, said the Holocaust eventually ended after World War II was finished, but the horrible events destroyed most Jewish communities. You can go ahead and write your own annotation or something that's similar to mine. Okay, the last thing that I have a couple things for us to do before we finish up the lesson. But the next thing I want you to do is go ahead and write your big idea. And I'm going to go ahead and do that down here today, just because there's not a whole lot of space at the top of my text, but I have a good chunk of section down here. So we're going to go back to our share screen. And now that we finished our reading, we're going to craft our big idea. Remember that your big idea helps us remember our overall main thing or things that the author taught us about the topic in our text, okay? So you're going to have 5 minutes to craft your own big idea for your whole passage. I want you to write it down, and then if you have somebody you can share with, you can share with your partner, okay? So going back to your text, use the text that we just went over to craft your own big idea. You can write it down on your paper below. And for time's sake, I'm going to go ahead and keep going, but here's where you should pause the video if you are not done writing your big idea. So pause the video and then you can restart in just a moment, but I'm going to go ahead and go back to my text and share. So, whoops. My big idea was that the Holocaust was an evil event fueled by hate, where over 1 million Jews were murdered senselessly for their religion and race. The Holocaust devastated the Jewish communities in Europe. So what I did here is I took my annotations from each section and kind of used them to craft a big idea for the whole text. So I'll let you pause the video here if you'd like to keep looking at my big idea and compare it to yours. This brings me to our race response for today. This is also on the back of your text. We are not going to do the multiple choice questions in this lesson today. You can do them on your own, and then I'm going to record a lesson going over them on Friday. So you can do them on your own and then check your work with that lesson on Friday. But I want you to go ahead and flip over to this page right here where it says race response, response to reading assessment prompt. We're going to restate, answer, cite evidence, and explain our thinking. So according to the text, what was the relationship between prejudice against Jewish people and the oppression they suffered during the Holocaust? Cite evidence from the text in your response. That's the first thing you're going to do. The second thing you're going to do is down here. This says literature circle, share your thinking. You're going to start to record some thoughts that you have based on this prompt here. You're going to take them to your small groups with your teachers, and you're going to share those thoughts that you had written down. So before you finish today, I'm not going to go over these in the lesson, but before you finish today, I want you to go and I want you to use your text to answer this question and start to record your thinking down here for this prompt. The Holocaust is taught in history classes today so that people will never forget. Although it is not pleasant to hear about the murder of millions of people because of their religion, race, or beliefs, educators believe it is important to study. What can we learn from tragedy, and why is it important to study tragic history? And you're going to write down some of your thoughts right here, and this is a discussion question that we'll share in group. So again, finish this page before you close out today, and then bring it to your small group because your teachers are going to go over it with you. If you have any questions, you can email me or Ms. Gans or Ms. Schwarbro. We're happy to help, and we are excited to keep continuing these lessons with you. I'll see you guys on Friday. Bye.